The Blighted Flame. Inassea Chronicles. Book 1. By Peña. Chapter 1. It could be anywhere. Concealed within a painting, hidden behind the face of a statue, under their feet. Each step Virgil took was slow, methodical. He kept his shoulders squared and his back straight. His hands were at the ready in anticipation of the slightest bit of provocation. It was dark, save for the glimmers of moonlight fighting their way through the fog-laced windows, and a wisp of fire hovering in the air. The thick must of centuries of history flooded Virgil's nostrils. The nightly halls were a stark contrast to their daytime counterparts. Just hours prior, the museum bustled with attendees. Now, it lay barren, its only occupants the curator, the hunter, and his prey. "Are you sure the fire is absolutely necessary?" Mr. Bigsby stammered as he followed behind Virgil. "I am," Virgil replied, keeping his eyes forward. His tone was low, just barely above a whisper. "And please refrain from speaking unless it's absolutely necessary." Right." Virgil glanced back over his shoulder and lowered his brow. Mr. Bigsby swallowed the lump in his throat and covered his mouth. The two men stood in sharp contrast to one another. Mr. Bigsby was short at 5'5" and wore a gray tailored suit complete with a tie and cufflinks to match. Virgil, on the other hand, stood at 6'3". He was dressed casually in a black trench coat, white t-shirt, black jeans, and buckled boots. Mr. Bigsby looked around, analyzing each exhibit to ensure that it was still pristine. I hate to bother," he whispered, his hand curled around his lips, "but the fire is both necessary and under control." Virgil interrupted with a bite in his tone. I'm sure that it is. It's just if visibility is an issue, we have plenty of lights." Virgil waved his hand. "Like I said before, I need the fire to detect the phantom, and if we turn on too many lights, it might not appear at all." Right," Mr. Bigsby said, placing a hand on Virgil's shoulder. But you see," Virgil's eyes twitched as he stopped and turned around. "We've already been over this, Mr. Bigsby." Sweat was beginning to form around the curator's forehead, and his hands were unsteady. Forgive me. It's just that we've been lucky enough to keep business going, even with the phantom problem. But if anything were to happen to the exhibits, I already know. That's why I'm taking extra precaution while working this job. Speaking of which, if you insist on tagging along, I really need you to. I'm sure that you'll be careful, but accidents happen, and given your profession, we're honestly a little cautious." Virgil took a deep breath, forcing his words down his throat. His patience waned thin, along with the urge to conceal that fact. "I mean, there's nothing wrong with being a hunter," Mr. Bigsby blurted out, his face reddening. "It's just, we were really hoping to hire a crusader for this job." "Let me guess." Virgil rolled his eyes. "The Alliance didn't have time to spare for something so insignificant." The curator cleared his throat. Well, they didn't exactly put it like that." "Oh, I'm sure they made it sound real nice." Right," Mr. Bigsby said with a shake of his head. "Are you absolutely positive that you can handle this job? Without damaging anything?" Virgil looked at Mr. Bigsby in the eye, placing his hand on the curator's shoulder. "Look," he flashed a smile. "I'm not an esteemed crusader, but I am a professional 4-star hunter, and I swear to you no harm will befall the museum under my watch. However, and I'm trying to say this as delicately as possible, perhaps you'd be more comfortable waiting in the security room. When I finish the job, I'll—" "Oh, no." Mr. Bigsby puffed out his chest as he removed Virgil's hand from his shoulder. "What kind of curator would I be if I let a pyromancer roam around in my museum alone?" A frown crept onto Virgil's face as he covered his eyes with his palm. "Why do I do this to myself?" he thought. "Okay, what's it going to take for you to let me do my job in peace?" A gust of wind barreled down the hall, sailing past the two men. The sparkling wisp of fire fluttered Virgil's coat and dragon-tooth necklace. What was that?" Mr. Bigsby stuttered. A slight chill overtook the hallway. Virgil smirked as he turned around. "That's what you hire me to kill." He firmed his jaw with determination, and he became weightless as his body surged with energy. He hovered off the floor and directed harsh instructions to Mr. Bigsby. Go to the security room, and I'll come for you after I've slain the phantom." "Wait!" Mr. Bigsby cried, reaching out for Virgil. "I'm coming with you." It was too late. Virgil sped down the hallway in pursuit. Weaving through the air, he followed the foul trail of aura left behind by the phantom. It was fast, and its movements erratic, but Virgil kept up the chase. In no time, he found himself within striking distance. Virgil's temperature rose as he gathered his mana unto his hands. Flames erupted around them like roaring campfires. He waved his hand, and a wall of fire appeared in front of the phantom. Cornered, the creature turned to face Virgil. Although its tattered cloak concealed its form, bits of flesh shone through the many rips in the fabric. Its brownish-green skin appeared to be dry and cracked. "I've got you." "What are you doing?" Mr. Bigsby shouted between tired breaths as he approached. Virgil spun around. "I told you to stay out of this." The phantom entered a stone sculpture of a man dressed in long flowing robes. It began to glow, and with a cackle, it brandished its fists. Virgil groaned as he held out his hand toward the sculpture. "This is getting dangerously close to not being worth it." "Stand down!" Mr. Bigsby demanded. "It's taken our prized masterpiece hostage." Virgil didn't respond. Instead, he closed his fist, and the statue burst into flame. Mr. Bigsby gasped and put his hand over his mouth. "What have you done?" The sculpture began writhing, and its wail echoed throughout the hallway. Slowly, it returned to its original form. The phantom burst out of the statue and thrashed around in the air. But no matter how hard it shook, the creature couldn't quell the fire consuming it. Before long, there was nothing left but a pile of ash on the floor and a pungent smell of burnt flesh in the air. Virgil released his fist, and the flame disappeared. His temperature turned to normal, and his mana stabilized. "You must be out of your goddamn mind!" Mr. Bigsby shouted as he marched in front of Virgil. His face was livid, red with rage. "Mr. Bigsby," Virgil said as calmly as he could, "I knew it was a mistake to keep you on this job. I just knew that you'd be nothing but trouble. It's a miracle you didn't burn the entire museum down." The curator's finger furiously waved just inches from Virgil's face. "I hope you didn't expect to get paid for this. After I'm through with you, you'll be lucky to ever find work in this city again." Virgil groaned as he pointed toward the sculpture. "You might want to inspect things before you blacklist me. I'm sure you'll find everything is in order." Mr. Bigsby pursed his lips as he turned around. His eyes grew wide and his mouth fell open. I don't understand," he stuttered in disbelief. He walked over and circled the sculpture, only to round it again. "There were flames everywhere, but there isn't so much as a scratch on it. I told you I would be extra careful. A good pyromancer can burn an entire forest to the ground, but a great one will only burn just a single tree." Right. I do recall you, mentioning something like that." Mr. Bigsby cleared his throat once more as he adjusted his tie. "It appears I underestimated you. Please accept my sincerest apologies." "Don't worry about it," Virgil replied as he tucked his hand into his coat pocket. "I'm just glad that I could help." After receiving his compensation, Virgil left the museum for the city night. Laron wasn't the largest city in the Diamond Nation, but it was sprawling nonetheless. Limestone buildings were spread across the valleys and cliffs, and a series of anti-gravitational platforms made traversing the city easier for those not gifted with flight. The streets were desolate, however. The void was something Virgil had grown accustomed to. A stiff breeze tousled the ebony waves flowing through his hair, and a layer of goosebumps coated his bronze skin. He pulled out his silver pocket watch. Midnight was fast approaching, putting a stir in his step. It didn't take long for Virgil to arrive at his destination. Petra's joint was far from ragged, but no one who lived a conventional life would ever rest there. The lot was fairly small, consisting of about 50 rental units, a shack of an office, and a motel bar. Despite the lack of paint, cars lined the parking lot in somewhat decent rows, and a flickering sign illuminated the area in bursts. Virgil entered the office. It was nearly desolate, the only thing filling the space being a desk, a computer, and a clock. Virgil approached the elderly woman sitting at the computer. A seemingly infinite number of wrinkles creased her face. "Truesdale," she said, not bothering to turn her head from the computer screen. "Glad to see you made it back in one piece. I was worried those books would bore you to death." Virgil chuckled. "It was a museum, Petra, not a library." Petra scoffed, still clicking away at her keyboard. "Does it really matter? They're both boring as hell and can't pay worth a dime." "Maybe, but somebody has to help them, right?" "Whatever you say, kid." Petra finally took her eyes off the screen. "As long as you have my money, I don't care how you waste your time." Virgil shook his head as he reached into his coat pocket. "I suppose that was my cue, huh?" Petra grinned as she took Virgil's payment. "If you're going for subtlety, go try one of them stuffy-ass hotels." She thumbed through each bill before placing them in her desk. "Is there something else that I can help you with?" "There is. Do you happen to have any new leads?" "Sure do." Petra returned her gaze to the computer screen. "There's a farm offering top dollar to be rid of their demon problem." Virgil shrugged. "Do you have anything involving witches?" "If I did, I would have told you. You know witches are an elusive breed." "Yeah," Virgil groaned. "I know. And if you do hear anything, you'll be the first to know, assuming you have the cash, of course. I am running a business here." Virgil left the office and made his way over to the bar, currently uproarious with a myriad of individuals swapping stories over bottles of booze. There were 2 floors in the building. However, the second floor was a mezzanine, allowing patrons of the top floor to see those on the bottom. The ground floor housed tables, while the top was reserved for things such as dartboards, pool tables, and arcade cabinets. The bartender's station was at the back wall on the first floor. There was a mess of shelves, each filled with bottles of liquor. The collection of spirits was impressive, but the real draw of the bar was the massive board that hung on the wall above it, nearly 6 feet tall and 20 feet long. It was entirely digital, with the screens sectioned off in squares. Each held either text, image, or a combination of both. Finally, there was a line of text at the very top of the screen. It was the only text to ever stay constant on the board and consisted of a single word repeated over and over again. Bounties. Virgil walked through the bar. A number of patrons stared at him. Some addressed him, while others simply nodded. Virgil smiled and continued walking. He was careful not to linger for too long. Doing so invited conversation he was never willing to have. "Ah, Virgil," the barkeep said as he approached. "Welcome back." "Thanks, Phil." Virgil claimed a spot along the counter's edge. Phil's wrinkled cheeks carried a sort of puffiness that made his demeanor seem jolly. Despite his age, his snowy white hair grew in abundance, so much so he needed to tie it back with a series of rubber bands. "So," he began as he prepared a glass for Virgil, "how was the hunt?" Virgil shrugged. "It was all right. Could have dealt without the chaperone." Phil laid the glass in front of Virgil. He then reached for a bottle of tequila from the top shelf. "Actually," Virgil interrupted, "could you pour me a glass of scotch tonight?" "Of course. If you don't mind me asking, why the change?" "I'm celebrating." Phil grabbed a bottle of scotch. "It went that well, huh?" he said as he filled the glass. "It's my brother's birthday," Virgil answered. His tone was somber, and his words nearly choked him. "He would have been 28 today." The barkeep frowned. "Would have been, huh? So that means he's no longer with us." Virgil nodded as he brought his drink to his lips. "I imagine so. It's been 10 years since he left home." "Really?" Phil raised a brow. "If that's the case, isn't it possible your brother's still alive? I mean, you don't know for sure, right?" In one gulp, Virgil swallowed his drink. Not so much as a wince as the bitter brown nectar nipped at his throat. He took in a deep breath and frowned. "No," he said, his tone definitive. "He's been gone for too long. When you're a hunter, silence always means death." He sat down the empty glass and pushed it away. "How much do I owe you?" Phil slid the glass back over and began to pour another round. "I'm sorry," Virgil stuttered. "I only wanted one." Phil gestured Virgil to take a seat. "These are on the house." As Virgil sat down, Phil grabbed another glass, filling it just as he had the first. "What's your brother's name?" "Danny," Virgil answered. "Listen up, everyone," Phil called out. The bar fell silent until the only sound was the light flickering from the parking lot. "Tonight," Phil continued as he raised his glass, "we drink to Danny Truesdale. Whether he is on the road or in the heavens, this one goes out to him." Virgil couldn't help but smile as he raised his glass. He brought the liquor to his lips once more. Again, he swallowed it whole, but somehow it tasted better this time around. The bar resumed a joyful chatter, and Virgil set the glass down on the counter. "Thank you," he said. "That really meant a lot to me." "Don't mention it," Phil said with a smile and a wink. "Please forgive me," Virgil heard from behind him as a hand came to rest upon his shoulder. "But I couldn't help but overhear you before. You're a hunter, yes?" Virgil turned around to find the nymph standing behind him. He was male, as evidenced by the fin upon his head, and he was nearly 6 feet tall. His skin was scaly and as white as chalk, which only accentuated his ocean blue eyes. He wore a black suit tailored to a T, not a single thread out of place. "I am," Virgil answered. "Is there something that I can help you with?" "Oh, I hope so. My name is Orlando. I serve the Newton estate as head steward. I'm afraid Miss Newton requires a hunter's service." "What's a job?" "Miss Newton has recently attracted the ire of a nefarious individual and—" "No, thank you," Virgil said hastily. "Sorry if I got your hopes up." Orlando paused at the curtly response. "Pardon my forwardness, but you haven't even heard me out." "I don't need to. I never accept bodyguard work." "I see," Orlando said as he moved next to Virgil at the bar. "If it's an issue with money, I assure you, you will be well compensated." Virgil shook his head. "I don't care about the money. That line of work tends to linger on longer than I prefer. Hope you understand." The nymph exhaled as he prepared to walk away. "I do. I'm sorry to have disturbed you." "Don't worry about it, and I hope you find what you're looking for." "As do I. I only hope we can find adequate protection before the witch makes her move." Virgil perked up as Orlando walked away. "Wait!" He stood, nearly knocking over his chair in the process. "Did you say witch?" Orlando stopped and turned around. "That is correct. Quite a nasty one, in fact." Virgil grinned, unable to contain his excitement. "In that case, you have yourself a bodyguard." "Are you sure?" Orlando asked, tilting his head. "I can't guarantee how long your services will be required." "Oh, I'm sure. If a witch is involved, I'm your man."